Kuf Gimel, Amud Beis. That's where we are. Today's Daf Kuf Daled. So what we were talking about yesterday, right, is we had a Mishnah. And the Mishnah essentially said that if a person steals and if a person then swears falsely. Yes, that's what we are. If a person swears and he swears, if a person steals and he swears falsely, he's got to not only pay the Karen, he's got to pay the Chomesh. Not only that, he's got to, in terms of the Karen, for sure, he's got to chase this guy all the way down to Madai. And Gemara said that this Mishnah seems to be at odds. It doesn't really seem to be go lefi shitas Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon had a machlokas in a different case where you stole from a number of people. You're not entirely sure who you stole from. Rabbi Tarfon was more makel, Rabbi Akiva was more machmer, but they never really said anything about a shvuah. So why is our Mishnah so focused on a shvuah? It's dafka where you made a shvuah. That's when you got to run all the way to Madai. But if you didn't make a shvuah, you don't have to run all the way to Madai. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon don't say anything about a shvuah. And the answer that we kind of left off with, which is where we'll pick up, is we said, no, really our Mishnah is Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon is just saying, in a case where you didn't make a shvuah, then you don't necessarily need to pay all 5 people. That's where he's a little bit more makel. But in a situation where you made a shvuah and you swore falsely, then you would have to go the extra mile, and he would be very machmer, and you would have to maybe go to Madai or whatever it is. So we're going to pick up. We have 3 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Tarfon. So the Gemara says. So again, the answer that we suggested is that our Mishnah is going like Rabbi Tarfon, but our Mishnah is talking about a case where you made a shvuah. The Gemara says, Rabbi Tarfon michti heicha de mishtaba lo sagya heicha de mishtaba lo sagya lo hoda ma'ir yavinishba afilu lo shvuah nami. We know she's just Rabbi Tarfon from other places that Rabbi Tarfon is really focused not so much on the shvuah, but really on the fact that someone was modeh. That's what he's focused on. So if you're telling me that our Mishnah is only being machmir because the person swore falsely, if this was really Rabbi Tarfon, the Mishnah shouldn't have been focusing so much on the shvuah. Should have really been focusing on the fact that the guy was modeh. And in order to get kapara when you're modeh that you swore falsely, that's where Rabbi Tarfon is normally very machmir. Tanya, you have a brisa says modeh Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon in yesterday's daf earlier on the Amud. He said, if I steal from 5 people, I don't know which one I stole from, I can just drop it in the middle, let them fight it out. But Modr of Tarfon, but Omer L'Shtayim, let's say I say to 2 people, Gazalti Echad Mekem, I know that I stole from one of you, Mana. The Ein Yodea Eza Mikem, but I don't know which one of you, but I am being moded that I stole from one of you. No Snilazamana, Vilazamana. Right? Shekvar Hoda, Mipi Atzmo. So yesterday's case of Gazal from 5 people is not where he's necessarily admitting that he stole. It's maybe Bezdin says that he stole or something like that. But where he is admitting that he stole, then you got to pay every single one. But the point is, and really the kasha is, how can you tell me that Rav Tarfon is the author of our Mishnah? Our Mishnah is focused on taking a shvuah. But if it was Rav Tarfon, the focus really should have been on, was he modeh or was he not modeh? In the case where he was modeh, that's when he's got to run all the way to Madai. That's a little play on words. But in the case where he wasn't modeh, maybe he wouldn't have to run to Madai. So Elama Rava says, I can tell you a whole different shot in how to understand the Mishnah and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon. He says, Shiny Masnis, and our Mishnah is a little bit different. Because in our Mishnah, we're dealing in a case where the Goslin he knows who he stole from, but Odile, and he's even admitting that he stole from this person. Because, right, let's say Reuven's the Ghana. Reuven knows that he owes the money to Shimon. Shimon knows that Reuven owes him the money. The problem is Shimon happens to just be in Madai right now. So it's not that easy for him to get the money. But he knows who owes him the money. We almost view that as if it's just a pikadon. And therefore, Hilkach Nishba Therefore, if the person swore falsely, right, and then now there's like a kapara element in addition to just the chosh and mishpat part of having to return the money, because he needs to get his kapara, we'll say to get your kapara, you actually got to go all the way out to Madai and give him the money yourself. But if you didn't swear falsely, and the only issue that we're dealing with right now is just how to get the money over to the nigzal, you don't necessarily need to run all the way to Madai. The reality is everyone knows you agree you owe him the money. He knows you owe him the money. When he comes back to town, you can just pay him then. So let's read it inside again. But hello, Ishba, in the case where you didn't make this shvua, so then havigabe pikadon. We just say it's like you have a pikadon, you owe him money, and ada asi b'shagale, and then when he comes back, you'll get the money. So again, long story short, how do we answer up this stira? We said our Mishnah was very focused on a shvua, and that's why I have to run to Mada. That sounds like it's not Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Tarfon. In the end, with the way Rava understood, the way he answered up the Mishnah was he said no. Both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon would agree to the halacha of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is dealing in a situation where you were admitting that you owe the money. The money itself is not in question, right? And therefore, in theory, you don't have to run all the way to Mada. It's just that in a case where you swore falsely, and now there's a kapara element that you need as well, in order to attain full kapara, you would have to schlep all the way to Mada. Okay, so the next line of the Mishnah was, if someone owes someone money, right, someone stole, and now he swore falsely, and now he owes him money, he's got to schlep all the way to Madai to get him the money. You can't give it to his son, you can't give it to his shliach.
And he has to pay the whole thing.
Okay. And you can't give it to the shliach, meaning, let's say Shimon owes Reuven money, right? Clearly, right, Shimon's got to pay Reuven. Shimon can't appoint a shliach, I mean, he can if he wants to. But if Shimon appoints a shliach to give the money to Reuven, and the shliach never gets to Reuven, Shimon doesn't have a time to I appointed a shliach, right? That doesn't work. Reuven still never got paid. What about the reverse? What if Reuven appoints a shliach to go collect the chov from Shimon? And now Shimon gives the money to this shliach, and the shliach never makes it back to Reuven for whatever the reason is. Does Shimon have a valid taina? Like, listen, I gave it to the shliach that you appointed. Or do you say, no, that's, shliach works in certain contexts in halacha, with a get, with kedushin. When it comes to certain chot mishpat type shilas, no, you got to make sure the money makes its way over to Reuven. I don't care that Reuven appointed a shliach. Take it up with the shliach, but you still owe Reuven money. That's going to be the next sugya. So, Itmar. Shliach sha'asa be'edim. In our example, Reuven, the person who was owed the money, he appointed a shliach, and he even did it with edim, right? So it's clear to everyone that Reuven appointed this guy a shliach. Rav Chizda Amar Havi shliach. Rav Chizda says this is a valid shliach. Therefore, if Shimon gives the money to the shliach, he's absolved. If the shliach never makes his way back to Reuven, that's Reuven's problem. Rabba Amar Lo Av shliach. Rabba says no, it's not a good shliach. Rav Chizda Amar Havi shliach. Rav Chizda says it's a good shliach. Lahachi Karchi v'ukmei be'edim deleka b'rshusei. I mean, that's literally why Reuven appointed the shliach with edim, exactly, so that Shimon can feel comfortable giving the money to the shliach. But Rabba Amar Lo Av shliach. Hachi Kamar Inish mehemnuhu isamach. Rabba says that's not really what's happening. Reuven is just trying to make it a little bit easier for Shimon. So he's saying, listen, here's a guy, I trust this guy. I think he's a trustworthy guy. If you don't want to schlep all the way to me, that's fine. You want to give it to him, trust him as well. Just know that if it doesn't make it to me, you're not going to be absolved, right? If I were you, I would get in a car and come to my house and give it to me. But I am letting you know that here's a guy here that I do think is relatively trustworthy. So again, Rabbah is a little bit harder to hear Bisvara, but the bottom line is the Gemara is going to start asking away, not so much on Rabbah, but really on Rav Chizda. So either way, we have a few kashas. One of them is going to be from our Mishnah. So the first one is not from our Mishnah. It's from a Gemara, right? I don't know. No, it's a Mishnah in Bava Metzia. Sorry. So the Mishnah says as follows: a shoel is a para. Let's say a person is borrowing a para. Now remember, a shoel is chayiv and onsin. So a shoel is borrowing a para. V'shilcha biyad beno, biyad avdo, biyad shlucho. And now the mashil, so say Reuven is lending a para to Shimon. Reuven sends this para with his eved, with his eved, with his son, with his shliach, whatever it is. O biyad beno, biyad avdo, biyad shlucho shoel. Or Shimon, who's the shoel, doesn't pick it up himself. He sends a shliach to pick up this para, umesa. And now the para dies. Pater. Shimon is still going to be pater, which is a tremendous chiddush. Remember, if Shimon had the para already and the para died, the shoel is chayav for onsin. But if Shimon sends his shliach to pick up the para from Reuven, and the para dies while it's with the shliach, Shimon is still pater, meaning Shimon's not going to be chayav until the para gets to his house. So the Gemara says, what is this case of shliach? If you're going to tell me that Shimon didn't appoint the shliach with the edim, So Menayadina, how do we even know that he's a shliach? Right? Ela das be'edim. It's got to be that Shimon appointed him with edim. We're all sure that this is a valid shliach uktani to pater, and yet we see that Shimon, the Shoel, is pater in this case. Kash l'Rav Chizda. So you see clearly that you can't appoint a shliach, right, when it comes to like dinei mamonos. But the Gemara says, no, Kadamar Rav Chizda, B'chiro Ulakito. Rav Chizda answers in a different context, which we'll see in a minute, that maybe this isn't a real shliach necessarily. So what's going on over here?
Question.
Yeah.
Yigal,
how are you?
Hi, okay. Reuven is the owner. Shimon borrowed the cow. What about if Reuven sending shlich to pick up Shimon from Shimon?
No. This case is a little bit different. This is Reuven is lending a cow to Shimon, but instead of Shimon going to pick it up, Shimon sends his shliach to pick it up from Reuven.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So Shimon is responsible in a way, should be responsible because
exactly. And that's exactly the Gemara's kasha, because the Gemara is saying, what do you see that Shimon's not responsible until it gets to his house, even though he appointed a shliach? So it must be that we know for sure that there's a concept of shlichos when it comes to a get and when it comes to being mekadosh a woman, but maybe when it comes to dinei mamonos, it's not the same. That Shimon's only going to be responsible when it gets to his house, and Reuven was irresponsible for giving this to a shliach. He should have made sure that it got to Shimon's house.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So the Gemara says, what was one of the hanachas in the Gemara? That it must be that Shimon appointed the shliach via Aden. And that's how we're all certain that this guy is a shliach of Shimon. But the Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe this guy was never a shliach of Shimon, and that's why Shimon's not responsible. So if he's not a shliach of Shimon, who is this guy? Why would Reuben have given his animals to some random guy? So the answer is, it's not that he was a random guy. He was some employee of Shimon, right? Reuven knew that this guy works with Shimon. Reuven saw him somewhere, and he said, oh, you work with Shimon, right? Shimon wants to borrow my cow. Why don't you take this cow to Shimon? Shimon will say, listen, you had no business giving it to this guy. I mean, I know you think he was trustworthy and whatever, but I never appointed him as a shliach, right? And maybe that's why Shimon's not chayav. But in a chanami, if Shimon had appointed a shliach and Reuven gave the cow to that shliach, so then of course Shimon would be responsible. This is just Reuven not being very responsible and just giving it to some random guy that he probably should not have given it to. So the Gemara is going to continue tonight, another kasha, and this one's from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah was very clear that when the Ganiv needs to pay back the owner, right, he cannot give it to the owner's shliach. The Mishnah was very clear about it. He said, don't give it to the owner's shliach. So the Mishnah, we see it inside. Tanan, lo yitain, lo libno, velo l'shlucho, right? The Ganiv can't give it to the victim's son, can give it to the victim's shliach. Hi shlucho hechidami. What is this case of shliach? If you're going to tell me that the victim didn't appoint the shliach with edim, menayadinan. How does anyone know that this guy was a valid shliach? Elalav, the asub edim. You're going to have to tell me that the shlichus was done with edim, and therefore this is a kasha on Reb Chizda. Because again, right, if the victim, right, the nignav appointed a shliach to collect the money from Shimon, from our ganiv, so then why can't Shimon give the money to the shliach, right? It must be that there's no concept of shlichus when it comes to these dinei mamonos. But this is where the Gemara says, this is where Reb Chizda gave his answer from the previous Gemara. Targum, Reb Chizda, b'schiro ulakito. No, really, I'll tell you, if it was a valid shliach, of course it would be fine. What happened over here was Shimon was davening mincha somewhere, and he bumped into some guy that works with Reuven, and he said, listen, I know you're going back to the office. I owe him $1,000. Here, please take this $1,000 back to Reuven. And then the guy didn't, for whatever reason. But Reuven will say to Shimon, I hear that you gave it to someone that works with me, but I never appointed him a shliach, right? You should never have trusted that guy, right? You should have made sure that it got to me. But the Gemara says, if that's true, fine. But what you're telling me is aval shliach shasu be'edim my hachanami shliach. But you're telling me if Reuven really did appoint a shliach, then by Shimon giving the money to that shliach, he would have been absolved. But the problem is, out of Tani Seva, the Mishnah itself has another case where shlichus works, and it's dafko a shliach bezdin. The Mishnah says you can't give it to a shliach, but you can give it to a shliach bezdin. So the Gemara says, out of Tani Seva, aval nosinu shliach bezdin. The fact that the Mishnah then says in the next case that you can give it to a shliach bezdin, liflog v'lisni v'dida. Why don't you write the case a little bit differently. We need a little bit of help from the Bach over here. We have some gears to issues, so I'm going to the Aleph and the Bach, right? What should the Mishnah have said? The Mishnah should have said, don't give it to a shliach, but b'med dvar mamurim b'shliach shlo asa be'edim. We're only talking about a shliach that you did not appoint with edim. Avol shliach shaso be'edim. But if it's a shliach that you appointed with edim, hachanami da b'shliach. So that of course that works. Meaning, why are you jumping to the case of a shliach bezdin? We have a much simpler case, a real shliach. The Mishnah should have said, don't give it to a son, don't give it to a fake shliach, but give it to a real shliach. That's what the Mishnah should have said. Why are you jumping to a case of a shliach bezdin? The Gemara says, that case, there's a mila to the case of a shliach bezdin. Why? Amri lo psikale, because if we just said you can give it to a real shliach, that halacha is not really absolute, because it depends who appointed the shliach. And the Gemara explains, shliach bezdin, when it comes to a shliach bezdin, lo shnaso nigzal, lo shnaso gadlin. It doesn't matter who appointed the shliach bezdin, whether it was Reuven in our story or Shimon in our story, so long as they appointed a shliach bezdin, you can give the money to the shliach bezdin, and that's going to work. But lo shnaso gadlin habishliach, so psikale, that's an absolute. But shliach shaso be'edim, when it comes to a regular shliach that was appointed with edim, tiki asu nigzal hu dabishliach. It's dafka if Reuven, the victim, it's only if he appoints that shliach that it works. But aso gazlin lo have a shliach. But if Shimon, right, the gazlin, if he appoints a shliach and he says, shliach, give the money back to Reuven, and the money never gets back to Reuven, of course Shimon's not going to be absolved. Reuven's going to say, I never saw the money. So like, great that you trusted some guy, but like that's kind of on you. So lo psikale, therefore it's not absolute. So the Mishnah prefers to say a case where it's absolute. Anybody that appoints a shliach bezdin, that's going to work, as opposed to a case where Dafka Reuven has to appoint the shliach, but not Shimon. But the point is, one of the things that we just mentioned in the Gemara was that when it comes to a shliach bezdin, it doesn't matter who appoints the shliach bezdin will always count as a valid shliach, and that point is not agreed upon by everyone. Apparently, there's a das yachad that disagrees. So the Gemara says, that halacha is not agreed to by this Tana. The Tanya of Shimon Elazar, Omer of Shimon Elazar says, shliach bezdin, even a shliach bezdin, it's sha'asu nigzal, below asu gazlan. It's dafka if the nigzal, if Reuven made the shliach, but not Shimon. Oh, a different case. So gazlan, let's say a gazlan made a shliach, but b'shalach halav and naftal shalo, but then immediately Reuven sent his own shliach to take it from that guy, pater. But the point is, in the second brisa, and again, the point here is just that they're arguing on a very minor point. The second brisa of Shimon Elazar is very clear that even when it comes to a shliach bezdin, it's not so true that either party appointing the shliach bezdin will make the shliach bezdin a good shliach. The second brisa seems to hold that it's dafka when the victim, when it's Reuven who appoints the shliach bezdin, that it works. But if Shimon were to appoint the shliach bezdin, it wouldn't work. Okay, But the bottom line is we had this machlokas of Chizda and Rabbah about whether you can appoint a shliach when it comes to dinei mamonos like this. Rav Chizda said you can. So Rav Yochanan and Rav Elazar Damar Travayu, Rav Yochanan and Rav Elazar both agree to Rav Chizda. They say that shliach sha'asu be'edim havi shliach. They say that a shliach that you appoint with edim does work to be a shliach. Vim Tomar Mishnah Seinu. And if you ask the kasha from our Mishnah, which again our Mishnah seems very clear that you cannot give the money to a shliach. So they'll have two different answers. One, the first answer is v'mamsilo shliach. It's really, that case was not Reuven appointing a shliach to collect the money from Shimon. It was Reuven essentially saying to someone, I'm agreeing, go to Shimon and offer to be Shimon's shliach to send me the money. So the Amarle, Reuven says to this guy, Isli Zuzi Gabi Planya, I've got money by some guy. Below Kamashad and he's not paying me back. Maybe he just doesn't have a way of getting me the money. So therefore, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you, why don't you go over to Shimon's house and say an offer to bring the money back to me? You're not acting as my shliach, right? But if Shimon doesn't want to come get into a car and come bring it to me, maybe he can give it to you and you can bring it to me. Now, listen, if something happens on the way, if you don't ever make it to me, that's going to be on Shimon. But I'm making it a little bit easier for Shimon to repay me. That's answer number one. And answer number two is Inami Rav Chizda b'Schir Rav Lakito. We can answer the same way we answered earlier. But again, this is not a shliach that Reuven is appointing as a shliach. It's just a person that Shimon happened to know that Reuven worked with. So, and Shimon decided to give this guy money. It was kind of irresponsible on Shimon's part, and that's why the Mishnah's case doesn't work. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, let's turn the page. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Assuming we paskin like Reb Chizda, and therefore Reuven, right, the nigna, the victim in our case, can appoint a shliach with edim, but even notwithstanding ein mishalchen mos bidyokni afilu edim. That's only going to be true if Reuven actually appoints this guy with edim. But what about this case? Reuven doesn't have edim. Reuven says to a shliach, he says, "Listen, go to Shimon and collect the money, and if Shimon says, how do I know that you are a valid shliach? I'll give you some sort of siman, right? I'll put a sign, like a signet on this thing that says, by the way, you should know, it's clear, Reuven appointed me to come get this money from you." Even if that happens, don't trust that guy. That's the only way it works. If Reuven's going to appoint the shliach is if he does it with edim. Any other way, it's not going to work. And the Gemara says, "Vafilu edim chasuma oleh." Even if whatever this sign, right, that Reuven gives to the shliach, you have edim that can attest that that is Reuven's signet. That doesn't matter. Reuven needed to appoint the shliach be-edim. Rabbi Yochanan Amar im edim chasumin oleh mishalchen. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees, and he says, listen, ideally Reuven would have appointed the guy with edim, but even if not, if Reuven gives him some sort of siman, and edim can attest that that siman is valid, then that's also good enough for Reuven to appoint a shliach to get this money from Shimon. But Amri Shmuel, but they said, according to Shmuel, who says that basically nothing works unless Reuven appointed him with edim, so my takante. Bottom line, if there's no edim around or whatever it is, what are you supposed to do over here? How is Shimon supposed to repay this loan? So, I mean, in the absence of, I guess, going to Reuven directly. So they said, Kihad Rab Abba, I can illustrate with a story. So one time, Rab Abba have a Masad Zuzi with Rab Yosef Bar Chama. I guess Rab Abba was once owed money from Rab Yosef Bar Chama, and Amar Leiler of Safra, so now Rab Abba, who was owed money, he said to Rab Safra, he said, Bahadi, the Atis, Asna in LA, you're going to that town anyway, so why don't you go collect the money? Now again, he didn't appoint him he didn't appoint him a shliach in front of Adim. He just said, everyone knows who you are, and everyone knows that you're collecting money from me, so go collect the money from me. When he got there, Amarle Rava Beret, Rava, the son, is now supposed to pay up the chov, and he says, "Mi kasav l'chayis kabalti." Do you have like a receipt that basically says that you received the money? So if anyone ever argues in the future, I can pull out this receipt. Amar leilo, I don't have a receipt. So ihachi, so Rava said back to him, Zil bereshe v'yichtov lach his kabalti. So go back to wherever you came from and make sure you get a receipt, and then come back and I'll pay you. But before he even got a chance to leave, he said, "L'sof." You know what? I take back what I said. Even if you have that receipt, that still doesn't count. Why not? Because maybe I have a bit of a concern that even if I have a receipt that says that I paid you, by the time you get back to that town, the owner will have died. The Yisomim will have now yarshin the claim. And the fact that I have this receipt doesn't do anything for me. So I'm not even comfortable with that. So Amar Lei, so this is now the shliach, right? So he says, how I need to get this chov paid up. What would you like me to do? So they said to him, Zil nekninu lach agav ara, b'ta at soblan hiskabalti. Here's what we can do. Have the real baldavar write make a kinyan, bikona the chov over to you. Once the chov is properly in your rishus, now you're my baldavar, and then I can pay you back. That's how we'll do this. So instead, you can obviously appoint the Rav Abba in this story, the guy who was owed the money. You could certainly have appointed him a valid shliach in front of Eidim. In the absence of that, the only thing you can do is you can be makne the chov over to this shliach. Hopefully, you really trust him. And now that he's the real baldavar, the guys who own the money can feel comfortable giving him the money and knowing that they're going to be okay, even if something were to happen to this guy on the road. The Gemara illustrates this actually happened once before. Rav Papa have a masak tracer alpi zuzi. Rav Papa must have lent a tremendous amount of money to Bechozai, to someone named Bechozai, and Akninu Nehelei Rav Shmuel Bar Abba, and he actually was makna this chov over to Rav Shmuel Bar Abba. Agav asipa de besa. The way he did it was through this kinyan. Agav They were giving him some ownership in some piece of real estate. And then he asked and then when he saw that he came back with the money, he was so happy. He kind of met him halfway over, at this place, Tavach, or whatever it is. But the point is that in lieu of being able to appoint a shliach via Adim, the only real way to give security to the guy paying the money is by being makna the chov over to your shliach, and then the guy who's got to pay the money knows that he's dealing with a proper Baal Davar. Okay, so yes.
When he goes to makna to the person needs to have a contingency.
Yeah, they got to work something out.
Which really makes it not a makna. He didn't really get it.
Well, I mean,
he's a shaliach. He didn't give up anything.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I mean, this is obviously some sort of like legal fiction sort of thing where you got to get the attorneys involved to make sure everyone's got what they need. But the point is, you're right. I mean, I don't know exactly. I think actually one of these Tosfos does kind of get into that, which like what type of kinyan is this? Like a real proper kinyan? Does he really have ownership like that? I think that's what you're asking. You know what I mean? But, yeah.
One more question: how do you tie the malve to the shaliach of the love? How do you tie him to be mushlam, to be completed? Because between the love, the malve has the shaliach, fine, but the love has the shaliach and it's all okay by kniya. But what about the malve? How do you tie the malve to the shaliach?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I think that's what Mark is asking. Mark is saying, right? I think what the question is, tell me this is what you're asking, right? I think what he's saying is even if the lender appoints even if the lender appoints the shliach, right? And this shliach now needs to have a kinyan such that now it's the shliach that really is owed the chov. So what happens when he has the money? What if the shliach just isn't a very trustworthy guy, right? And now the lender, right, is like, hey, you got to pay me the money. He's like, what money? What are you talking about? This was my chov. I just collected my chov. So yeah, you got to make sure that you're working with friends and that are trustworthy guys. Is that your question, Yigal?
Yes, that's the question.
Yeah, okay. So you're right. I don't know. You got to just, you got to make sure you're dealing with folks that you trust. So the last piece of this tomorrow, we're going to try to get to the top of Kufay Amud Aleph, right? We always like to give it back to Yoel on the right page, But either way, the last Gemara, the Mishnah said that you swore falsely, and therefore you owe the keren, and you also have to owe a chomesh. But you don't have to necessarily run to Madai to repay the chomesh. And the Gemara is going to make a diak from there, from the fact that the Mishnah even have to tell me that I don't have to run all the way to Madai to pay the chomesh. That's mashma that I do owe the chomesh. Meaning, you might have had a havamina that the chomesh is all for to do tshuva or something like that. So when it comes to kapara, you got to pay a chomesh. If you don't, no one can force you to pay a chomesh. If you don't want to do the tshuva, you don't want to do the tshuva, whatever it is. But it sounds like that's not the case with the Mishnah. The Mishnah is specifically saying you don't got to run to Madai. You don't got to run to Madai. You still got to pay it, right? So let's see it inside. So the Mishnah says, the Gemara says, Nasan losa keren v'chulei alma chomesh memonu. But the chomesh, even if you don't got to run to Madai to pay it, it still is a real chiyuv mamon. Ve'im mayis, and therefore, if you die, God forbid, mishamile yarshin. The yarshin have a valid. They have a real chiyuv that they got to pay this victim, not only the keren, but they also have to pay the chomesh. Utnanami, we see it in really the next line of the Mishnah as well, where it says nosen esa keren. Let's say you paid the keren, v'nishbal chomesh, then you swore falsely on the chomesh. Hare mosef chomesh al chomesh. The way we explained it yesterday is the chomesh kind of converts into a keren, and you got to pay the chomesh on the chomesh, which again very much implies that the chomesh is a real legal, it's a real monistic chiyuv, right? Even a furish brisa. The brisa says, if I stole money from my friend, and I swore falsely, umeis, and now I die, yarshin, mishalmin, keren, chomesh. The yarshin are chayav to pay the keren and the chomesh. We don't make the yarshin bring a carbon. The carbon is really on the ganav himself. He's the guy that needs the kapara. But we do make the yarshin pay the keren and the chomesh. So again, we have three different, Raya is one of them, Mefurish, that it sounds like the Yarshim are chayiv to pay the Chomesh, not just the Karen, but even the Chomesh. So The Gemara says, "Yarshim bnei shlume chumsha de'avu anavu." Is that really true that the Yarshim need to pay the chomesh of their father? We'll skip the parentheses. Uraminu. I have a stira, and this is from Brisa somewhere else. And the Brisa, Rashi quotes the first half of the Brisa. It basically says, essentially, how do I know that Yarshim do not have to pay the chomesh? Right, because of a drasha. So, and then the Brisa continues. Adayin ani omer emasai ena mashalim chomesh. Maybe I'll tell you that when is it that the Yarshim don't have to pay the chomesh? Al gezel aviv. It's bisman shelo nishba lohu v'lo aviv. It's maybe when no one swore falsely. But hu v'lo aviv. Let's say the Yarshim did swear falsely, even though the father didn't, or aviv v'lo hu, or hu v'aviv, or let's say no one swore at all. Or I may have had that backwards. Oh yeah, lo nishba lohu v'lo aviv. Hu v'lo aviv, aviv v'lo hu v'aviv minayin. In all these other cases, how do I know that you're still going to be patur to pay the chomesh? Tamalomar asher gazal v'asher ashak. Behu v'lo gazal v'lo ashak. And the bottom line is that the Yisomim themselves never stole, and therefore it's a long-winded brisa that says that Yarshim are never going to be chayiv to pay the chomesh. So we have a bit of a stira here. We have three different brisas that all seem to suggest, one of them says in Mefurish, that Yarshim are chayiv to pay a chomesh, and yet we have this other brisa that seems to say that Yarshim are never chayiv to pay the chomesh. Amar of Nachman, lo kasha kansha hodeh, kansha lo hodeh. The difference between the two brisas would be, one case the father was modeh that he owed the money, and then he died. So if the father was modeh that he owes the money, and then he dies, the Yarshim have to pay the chomesh. In the second case of the brisa, the father was never modeh. So if the father was never modeh, then the Yarshim never had the chiyuv in the first place, or even the father never had the chiyuv in the first place, and therefore the Yarshim don't have the chiyuv. But the Gemara says, "Elo hodeh." If you're telling me that the father was never modeh in his lifetime, karanami lo mashalim. So then they shouldn't even have to owe the Karen. Now, maybe you'll tell me, hachanami, right? They don't have to pay the Karen, but because it's not really tenable. Because mahadar achomesh, from the fact that the brisa is even talking about the chomesh, lememra dekarim mishalim, it implies that of course they'll have to pay the Karen. The only discussion is even on the secondary point, which is the chomesh. But Tanya, and moreover, we have a Mefurish brisa. By the way, it's that exact same brisa, the one that says they're patur to pay the chomesh. Later on in the brisa that says, "V'adayin ani omer emasai hu mishalim Karen al gezel." When do they have to pay the Karen on their father's gazela? Bisman shenishba hu va'aviv. Let's stop them maybe where everyone swore falsely, not only the father, but even they swore falsely. But aviv v'lo hu v'lo aviv, v'lo hu v'lo aviv. How do I know that even in that case they would be chayav to pay the Karen? Talmud lomar gzela ve'oshek aveda upikadon. If you look at the pasuk that the Bryce is referring to, it's a very wordy pasuk, and it talks about cases of gazela, talks about business transactions, it talks about being a shomer bikadon, it talks about finding an aveda. In all of these cases, if a person had property that didn't belong to them and they swore falsely, they're going to be chayiv the Karen, and they're going to be chayiv the chomesh. And this brisa ends with cryptically with the words yesh talmud. So the way the brisa ends, it says, how do I know? Tamalomar gzela va'oshek aveda bikadon yesh talmud. Period. So the bottom line is, the question is, Rav Nachman, you just tried to answer up the stira and brises by saying one of the cases where he was modeh, one of the cases he was not modeh. In the case where he wasn't modeh, the kids shouldn't even be chayav the Karen, but we know they are chayav the Karen, so that can't be a good answer. Before we actually get back into the discussion, the Gemara just has a side note. It says, like, what in the world was his last two words of this last brisa? Yesh Talmud, what does that even mean? So the Yasser Rav Huna v'Kamar Lashmai says Rav Huna was once learning, sitting down, saying over this sugya. And Amarle Rabba Beret, so Rabba, his son, said to him, Yesh Talmud Kamar. Do you just say the words Yesh Talmud Mar? Yesh Talmud Kamar Mar? Oh, Yesh Talmud Kamar. Like, he wasn't even sure. Like, what did you just say? Did you say Yesh Talmud, or did you say Yesh Talmud? Like they should pay the Karen. So Amarle, Rav Huna responded. He said Yesh Talmud. No. The brisa says the words Yesh Talmud, ume rubai dekroi amri. And what the brisa means is, from all these extra words in the pasuk, we darshan the fact that the kids are always going to be chayav the Karen. Okay.
They have to pay the Karen.
They have to pay the Karen, exactly.
Is this also the case when there is no inheritance?
No. They would only have to pay if there was an inheritance. Not only that, we'll actually see in a second. Hold that thought. So Elamai lo hoda, right? So what did Rav Nachman mean when he said lo hoda? It's lo hoda aviv, the hoda bino. The case where they're not going to be chayiv, the chomesh, is where the father wasn't modeh, but even the children were modeh. The children were modeh. The chiddush is that they're still not going to be chayiv the chomesh, even where they were modeh, right? So they're still going to be chayiv the keren, meaning, again, the question was, if the father wasn't modeh, why are they chayiv the keren? They're chayiv the keren because they themselves are modeh. So now they have something that belongs to someone else. Clearly, they have to give back the keren. I mean, that's not even up for debate. But the chiddush is that they are not going to be chayiv the chomesh, even though they themselves were modeh, that there was gezela going on. So the Gemara says, if they were modeh and they swore falsely, so the case would be the father stole something, right? And then the father dies. The kids swear falsely. They say, listen, as far as we know, right, my father did not owe you anything. They were lying. They knew that he definitely stole. And now they're being modeh that they swore falsely and that their father had stolen. So the Gemara says, right, they have to repay the keren. That doesn't belong to them. Clearly, they have to give the keren back to the victim. But they don't have to pay the chomesh. The Gemara says, the bottom line is they did make a shvua. And if they made a shvua and they swore falsely, so why don't they have to pay the chomesh, right? So Amri, the answer, b'she'ein gzela kayamet. It's where and this is really, Mark, where you were kind of getting to. It's where the gzela is no longer around. And this answer will make a lot more sense literally 1 week from today, next Wednesday, on Daf Yomi Aleph, where the Gemara really gets into what happens if a father steals for his children, and he steals food, and now the food is gone, right? And then maybe the father's gone. So do you have to repay something which is no longer in the world? So that's really what's going on over here. The reason why they don't have to pay the chomesh is because the gzela is no longer. It says, right? That's the sugya that we're going to learn in a week. So then why do they have to pay the keren? Because even though the gzela itself isn't around, but the father did leave us nechasim, he did leave us real estate, so we can pay back from this real estate. The Gemara says, bottom line, even if you have a chrayas nechasim, that shouldn't help because it's a milva al pehi, right? When the guy stole, he didn't write a star saying I stole money from you. So this is all a milva al peh. And a milva al peh ain't no go lo man yarshin lo man lakuchos. If it's all a milva al peh, you can't collect this from the yarshin. So why do we even care that there's a chrayas nechasim? All right, answer is neshama badin. So we're just making a lot of ukimtas. No. There already was a court case, and the court poskined that the father owed the money. The father happened to die. So because the father happened to die, the kids are now going to be chayiv to pay. They're not going to be chayiv to pay the chomesh because the thing's not around. They are chayiv to pay the keren because the real estate's around. We're just kind of going in circles. If you're telling me that all of this amount was determined prior to the father dying, why aren't they chayiv to pay the chomesh? Because the bottom line is, why are they ever chayiv this chomesh? Is because they made a shvua. We have a klal ein yishbain al karkal. So if the only reason why they would ever be chayiv to pay is because there was nechasim mishibadim, because there was karka, we almost view their shvua that says my father didn't owe you any money is a shvua on this karka. We have a klal ein yishbain al karkos, and therefore we're not going to be mechayiv the chomesh on these children if the shvua was always on the nechasim mishubadim in the first place. So a little convoluted, but that's kind of how we get to the end. We'll just finish this last piece. Rava Amar, he says now a whole new teretz. Rava says Nahachamai Skinon. Really, I'll tell you, it's going to Haisa Daiskia. What happened was the father had some sort of money pouch, right? That's what he stole. It was the Daiskia Shal Aviv and Mufkedes Biadacher. The reality is the money pouch was just somewhere else. And the kids very truthfully and honestly thought he didn't steal. They didn't see the money. They didn't know where it was. So therefore, Karen Mishalim, so they have to return the money pouch to the rightful owner. They got to pay back the Karen. That for sure they have to do. But Chomesh lo Mishalim, they're not going to be chayav to pay the Chomesh. The whole aviyada. The reality is they didn't swear falsely. They didn't know. You're only going to have to pay the Chomesh if you knew there was a Xela and you're denying it.
You have
kids,
to know
they
that
had no idea.
swore.
They didn't swear falsely if they didn't know. So because they didn't swear falsely, they're not going to be chayav the Chomesh. They're only going to be chayav the Karen.